That is it for me today. Thank you so much for listening to today's show. And as always, if you have questions or need specific advice, ideas, or just some help regarding your particular real estate needs or situation, or if you're just looking to buy or sell real estate in Florida, well then DM me on Instagram at The Salib Group, or just send me an email to mark@thesalibgroup.com. Don't forget to leave a rating for the show, follow, subscribe, help others find the show, and be informed and educated about the real estate market just like you. Until next time. There are only a handful of housing markets out there where there are more homes for sale than there were before COVID, and in some cases, significantly more. And those housing markets in the U.S. right now are just might be where buyers actually have some leverage. Now, why am I comparing inventory from 2019, pre-COVID, to today? So when I talk about inventory being above or below 2019 levels, it's not random. There's a reason why I'm picking that year. And the reason is 2019 was, if you think about it, the last normal housing market. It was before mortgage rates were, let's call it, very artificially low, right? 2.5%, 3%, 30-year fixed mortgage rates. There wasn't a pandemic-driven boom, let's say, or a migration boom, right? There was no stimulus added, right? We're just coming out of a pandemic. Stimulus is being pumped into the system just to keep the economy, which was essentially, if you remember, it was on life support, nothing going on. Nobody was leaving their house. And it was a time when supply and demand were a lot more balanced. It was just a normal market in 2019. But then 2020 happened. COVID hit. And we all know after that, mortgage rates plummeted, right? Just to stimulate the economy, we saw them drop to 2 to 3% for the 30-year fixed. Demand absolutely exploded for housing. Inventory almost collapsed and prices skyrocketed, 20, 30, 40, 50, maybe 100% in some areas, in some markets. So it wasn't normal. It was just not a normal market, in 2020 and beyond. And even really it hasn't been since then. So that was a very distorted, kind of strange environment that we saw, once in a lifetime kind of thing. So are we still in a market like that, or are we finally kind of going back to normal now? And, the way I look at it is, I'm not comparing the market to last year. I'm comparing it to 2019 because that's the last time the housing market behaved somewhat normal. So what we're trying to figure out is this. Are we still in a, call it, distorted market, or are we finally back to something that looks a little bit normal, at least in some pockets of the country? All right. There are these markets that have inventory right now that are actually, believe it or not, above pre-COVID inventory level, meaning there's more supply in these markets than there was in 2019. Okay, so if you remember, for the longest time, we were talking about how undersupplied we are, how there's such a major shortage, and how demand is just completely outweighing supply. Now, that supply can come from existing home sales. It can come from new construction too. All right. But anyway, here are the markets, okay, where I would call it there's some pretty good buyer leverage here, right? Because, let's face it. Listen to this. Austin, Texas. It's about 35% above 2019 levels. Now, I'm pulling this from Realtor.com. This is data from Realtor.com. Austin, Texas, 35% above 2019 levels. Phoenix, Arizona, has about 25% more supply than it had in 2019. San Antonio, Texas, 30% more. A lot of new construction there. Same with Dallas, Texas, 20% more. A lot of new construction there. Cape Coral, Florida, 50% more. It's one of the most oversupplied markets in the country. Fort Myers, Florida, 45% more. Boise, Idaho, 25% more. And Las Vegas, Nevada, 20% more. More inventory than 2019 in those markets. Now, here are some markets where it's kind of, let's call it getting closer to normal. They're about where they were in 2019 when it comes to how much inventory is on the market. Tampa, Florida, Orlando, Florida, Nashville, Tennessee, and Atlanta, Georgia. All right, and here I'm going to give you 4 markets where supply is still very constrained. Okay, so now one is New York City, 30% below 2019 numbers. So New York City is still very supply constrained. Los Angeles, 35% below 2019. Chicago, 20% below. Boston, 25% less inventory than 2019. All right, so what do you notice about this? So the markets that have more inventory than they had in 2019, well, they were kind of like the biggest winners post-COVID, right? They were migration hotspots, a lot of remote workers moving in. They went through some seriously fast price growth. And since then, in the last few years, demand's cooled with rates rising and with more inventory. But remember this important factor that I kind of mentioned earlier. New construction is driving a lot of the inventory too, okay? So when we compare to 2019 to today, a lot of these places are going through significant new construction, right? More planned communities, more condo buildings, townhome construction. So it's not, I don't want you to have the impression that all of a sudden a bunch of sellers are out there trying to sell their houses. A huge portion is coming from new constructions, especially in some of the markets I mentioned, like Austin, Phoenix, Dallas, as I mentioned, even Cape Coral. And that's understandable. Something that happened right after COVID was builders really started to ramp up construction. Demand was booming, so they were building. They were trying to feed that post-COVID demand in 2021 and 2022, and they were trying to feed that migration demand into places like, Texas and Florida. So builders, of course, they do what they do. They add supply when they see that it's needed. So keep in mind, it doesn't mean that we're saying there's a bunch of sellers out there panic selling or anything like that. It just means there's more total supply, and it includes all that new construction. So, all right, why does it matter? Because these are the markets that I keep talking about where you get more seller competition and you have more options as a buyer. You have more negotiating power as a buyer, as an investor, right? It's more competition from builders and homeowners all at the same time. Right? What happens when inventory overshoots? What happens when there's more supply? Well, that's what you're starting to see in those markets, right? Price reductions, longer days on the market, sellers giving concessions, at closing. And you just have more leverage for buyers. So, there's opportunity in some of those places that have more inventory than they had in 2019. And so as an investor, in those areas, target listings that are stale, that have been on the market plus 90 days, that have seen those price reductions. All right. What else, what else do we want to talk about as far as what you should do as an investor? There's another side to this too. Some of these markets could have distressed sellers, right? These markets are correcting, and there are buyers that, did buy in 2022, right? And maybe they don't have as much equity as someone who bought before 2022 in some of these markets. Maybe they didn't. Maybe they bought high, right? That's possible. That's possible. And it's something I think as an investor, if you look into the markets I mentioned, and you can look up all this data, in the various MLSs, and it's all public record too in most of these counties. You just see like, okay, hey, somebody bought a property in 2022 and they paid this much, and now it's 2026 and look at what they're selling it for, right? About the same amount, so that could be a sign of a distressed seller. and it could be opportunity. All right. So if you want that, if you're looking for that opportunity, don't look at the places where inventory is still kind of tight. Look where supplies already come back to those 2019 levels or exceeded them in a few cases. Because I think that's where the leverage shifts in your favor as a buyer or investor of real estate. Before we end today's show, stop what you're doing and subscribe right now to Real Estate Market Minute Plus. Listen to all episodes ad-free. Get exclusive bonus episodes and content and help support the show's growth, longevity, and future improvements. Go to realestatemarketminute.supercast.com right now. You can also find the link in this episode's show description. Check it out. I know you'll love it. That is it for me today. Thank you so much for listening to today's show. And as always, if you have questions or need specific advice, ideas, or just some help regarding your particular real estate needs or situation, or if you're just looking to buy or sell real estate in Florida, well then DM me on Instagram at The Salib Group, or just send me an email to mark@thesalibgroup.com. Don't forget to leave a rating for the show, follow, subscribe, help others find the show, and be informed and educated about the real estate market just like you. Until next time.